This lecture will be devoted to the relationship between mental concepts as they are stored in our minds and public words, that is, encoded words that we make use of when communicating. So perhaps we'll discuss types of mapping between words in the language we speak and concepts in our minds. So the mapping, that is the relationship between words in the language and concepts in our mind, may be exhaustive, so every concept corresponds to a word, and conversely, or partial. Some words may lack a corresponding word, or some words lack a corresponding concept. Okay, so we are talking now about some theoretical issues, right? How linguists try to solve the problem, how they try to define the relationship between concepts and words. So the claim might be that the mapping is exhaustive or that the mapping is partial. So the mapping may be one-to-one, one-to-many, many-to-one, or a mixture of the above. So it seems that the exhaustive one-to-one mapping is not plausible because obviously there are certain words that do not encode just one concept. So, for instance, personal pronouns do not encode concepts at all, if you think about it, right, or they. You can also think about some other indexical expressions and you know that they do not encode just one concept, if we may say that they encode concepts at all, because these are just keys to the concept. They somehow narrow down the space within which you look for the concept. So this extreme view of one-to-one mapping between words and concepts has to be excluded. Apart from indexicals that are devoid of conceptual content, there are some other words that have some conceptual content but are not fully fledged concepts. So here are some examples such as my, have, near, long. You perhaps remember we discussed underdeterminacy of language, and obviously these lexical items may serve as good illustrations of underdeterminacy of language. So they have some conceptual content, but the semantic contribution must be contextually specified. So in other words, in the context, we must know what they really mean for an utterance to have a truth value, that is, for an utterance to be converted into a proposition, okay? A proposition is truth evaluable, but to derive the proposition, we have to know what particular constituents really mean. So these not fully fledged concepts need further specification. So we may conclude that not fully fledged concepts are in a way pro-concepts, so they are potential concepts. Now, the view taken by relevance theorists is that not only indexicals or incomplete concepts, not fully fledged concepts such as my, have, near and long, needs a kind of contextual specification, but that in fact all words behave as if they encoded pro-concepts. So even if they do encode full concepts, the concepts conveyed have to be contextually worked out. So this is the claim. In other words, if you can imagine that all words have an invariant ingredient of meaning, but a huge part of their meaning has to be contextually determined. So this is just the same process as applies to indexical expressions. So let us now provide arguments against one-to-one correspondence between linguistic encodings and concepts we entertain in our mind. Mind you that some concepts have no corresponding words. For instance, what you keep in your drawer. I'm sure that you more or less know what you keep in your drawer, but there is no single lexical item that can represent it, because you can keep various things there, old photographs and keys and pencils and pencil sharpeners and notebooks and God knows what else, but you have some kind of idea what you can find there. So when you're looking for something, you know where you should look for it. Again, you have some kind of idea what can be bought in a do-it-yourself shop. You know what to expect. In other words, you have a concept of what can be found there, even though there is no single word representing that concept. Now, probably some of you might have your child's best friend, but there is no single word for that. Now, you may also have some concept, perhaps not all of you, but you may have some concept for collective body of all uncles or aunts that you have, but again, there is no concept for that. We can also refer to the word sibling, so there is such a word as sibling in English and in Polish, but there is no such a word in French, but nevertheless, we cannot claim that the French do not have this concept in their mind. So, in other words, we may say that even though there are no corresponding words, there are appropriate beliefs stored mentally in a non-lexicalized mental concept. So there is a concept, there is no word. So this proves that one-to-one correspondence is not actually plausible. Now, it is also possible that not all words map onto concepts, nor all concepts map onto words. So we may mention polysemy, and here you can think of the verb open. So mind you, how many different concepts can be expressed by means of the verb open. You can open a bottle, you can open a book, you can open a wound, you can open a washing machine, and a number of other things. So indefinitely many concepts, because mind you that each opening, so to say, involves a different activity, can be visualized in a different way. So in fact, it represents a different mental concept. But this concept is not separately encoded. We may also say something about synonyms. So, for instance, snake and serpent, one concept, two words. Or we may mention homonyms, that is, such words as bank. So one word but several concepts, and they are not related to each other. So again, as you can see, all these can be used as arguments against one-to-one correspondence between words and concepts. We've already discussed code theories when introducing ostensive inferential theory, that is relevance theory by Babb and Wilson, but let us be back now to code theories, because in code theories, the assumption is that there is a correspondence between, well, exhaustive or one-to-one correspondence between encodings and concepts. So the classical code theory of communication assumes that for every thought that can be linguistically communicated, there is a sentence identical to it in its content. The communication of a thought is achieved by uttering a sentence identical to it in content. Okay? So the only way to communicate thoughts is to encode them. So this is the most extreme version of the code theory. A slightly updated version assumes that coding and decoding, that these two processes can be speeded up or bypassed by inferential routines. Thus, full encoding is not always necessary. So this explains, for instance, the use of indexical elements. So if it is possible to save effort, let us follow an inferential routine. But apart from such minor deviations, our thoughts are mainly coded and later on decoded. In this updated version of the code theory, paragraph B, that in the above definition, is slightly modified. So instead of the communication of a thought is achieved, the communication of a thought can be achieved by uttering a sentence identical to it in content. So code theories believe that still coding and decoding are fundamental, and inferential is subsidiary, it's just supplementary, additional, okay, of minor importance in the process of communication. If so, code theorists must assume that the semantic resources of a language are rich enough to encode all communicable thoughts. So every concept is encodable. Sometimes perhaps it is not encoded, but is encodable. It is possible to encode it. Now, within inferential approaches, the assumption is that most mental concepts do not map onto words. So in other words, there are more concepts we are capable of entertaining in our mind than words available in a language. So linguistic resources are restricted in a way, are limited in comparison to our mental resources. Now, mind you that the number of perceptual stimuli we can discriminate is far greater than the number of words available. And here you can think of colors. If you look at colors and if you then try to remember what you've seen, you are capable of differentiating among various nuances of colors, if I may say so. But obviously we do not have a word for every color we discriminate. We may have a concept for every color we discriminate. It may be pretty real for us, but not necessarily a word. So you can see that there are more concepts than words. Now, someone might claim that this capability of discriminating does not necessarily result in conceptualization. That is, we can see the difference between one shade of blue and the other, but it does not mean that these two shades of blue are then conceptualized, and then we keep in our memory, we store in our memory two different concepts of blue. It may be the case, but it doesn't have to be so. But even if concepts are not regarded as ephemeral representations, it can be argued that we do form idiosyncratic, non-lexicalized concepts, ineffable, that is, that cannot be expressed. Ineffable means that cannot be encoded. So even if you think that perhaps color discrimination is not the best example, I'm sure that there are such concepts that you definitely have in your mind and that you are capable of retrieving from your memory at any time, even though there are no words for them, and these are not ephemeral representations. These are pretty stable concepts. This might be, for instance, a mood that you recognize in a person that you've known for a long time, and you know what it means. So there is a pretty definite concept of that mood and certain consequences that mood of this person might have upon your mutual life, or mutual relations, your common life. Or it might be a particular feeling that you don't like, but that reappears from time to time in a particular occasion. Again, you cannot find a word for that, but this is something really familiar. So these are non-lexicalized but pretty stable concepts that can be called idiosyncratic because they derive from your personal experience. But leaving aside for a moment those ineffable concepts, let's just go to something that seems to be fully encoded, and let's just analyze an example. So do you want to go to the cinema? This is what Peter asks, and Mary replies, I'm tired. And obviously this tired is pretty general, okay? So what Peter derives from Mary's response is that Mary is tired enough not
want to go to the cinema. Okay, and then Peter says, "Come on, you're not that tired." But mind you, that tired means that this is a peculiar concept of tiredness. So it is context-specific concept of tiredness. Okay, mind you that Peter does not deny that Mary is tired. He simply denies that she is tired to the degree conveyed by her utterance. So we may say that this is a circumstantial notion of tiredness. And the circumstantial, occasional notion of tiredness is not lexicalized. Again, it may be ephemeral, but it may as well be stable. If it becomes stable, then it has its mental entry, its file, and you just open this file whenever you recognize it, whenever you come across the same meaning. So perhaps it is Mary's usual excuse. Mary usually says, "I'm tired," when she doesn't want to do something, and then if that type of tiredness represents a particular concept, and if it has been repeated, I mean, if it has occurred a sufficient number of times, then obviously it might have become lexicalized already, and now it is a stable concept in the memory, in Peter's memory. Now, if you look at the next example, so Peter and Mary are visiting a museum, and Mary says, "I'm tired." So again, mind you that this time Peter may derive a number of implications from this particular meaning of tired. So it may be that Mary's enjoyment is diminishing, that she would like to cut short the visit, that she wants to go back to the hotel, that she wants Peter to go back with her, a number of implications. And again, the meaning here of that tired is different than the meaning of the previous tired. So the concept of tiredness might be different this time than the concept of tiredness referred to in the first utterance. As you can see, tiredness, generally speaking, is an affable concept, but again, the concept that we refer to at a particular moment and that the addressee is to reconstruct differs dramatically from the encoded concept. You might be tempted to think that the last example, when Mary was tied in the museum, that was just a conceptual adjustment and not necessarily a separate concept, that type of tiredness represented conceptual adjustment, that neither Mary nor Peter did actually entertain a separate concept of tiredness connected with them visiting a museum. But perhaps now I'd like to provide you with another example, and you will see that what appears to be a conceptual adjustment, what appears to be ephemeral, may in fact be a pretty stable non-lexicalized concept. So you can again imagine Mary at an Italian trattoria, and she says something like, "I love Italian food." Now, obviously it may be in Italy, but it doesn't have to be in Italy. It may be in Poland or in England, and then what we are served is not exactly Italian food, but what the innkeepers or patrons believe to be Italian food. So, and besides, there might be some other modifications of that phrase, Italian food. So the question is it really prototypical Italian food, or is it Mary's idiosyncratic category of Italian food? Perhaps Mary likes that type of food that is provided at a particular restaurant in London or wherever, which has nothing to do with typical Italian food. You understand? It may be, let's say, a vegetarian restaurant, or so it may be just some kind of spaghetti or with tofu or whatever. You understand? So not necessarily genuinely Italian, which means that when Mary says Italian food, she she refers to her idiosyncratic, highly individual category of food. And it is not just occasional, it is not just circumstantial, because if Mary says that she loves that kind of food, it may have certain consequences. Mary may, for instance, prepare that food at home according to the image she has in her mind, so according to the concept that she entertains in her mind. Okay, so this is what I mean, the process of stabilization of what seems to be a conceptual adjustment or circumstantial use into a concept. So a word which encodes a given concept can be used to convey, as part of a speaker's meaning, another concept that neither this word nor any other expression in the language actually encodes. So Italian food, as Mary uses it, does not, in fact, encodes genuine Italian food, but there is no better expression in English that would match the concept that Mary has in her mind. The occurrence of a word in an utterance provides a pointer to a concept involved in the speaker's meaning. So it is just an incentive, so to say, we may say, that the expression Italian food, the incentive which is aimed to open the appropriate file. So Peter knows, or has known Mary for such a long period of time that now he knows what it means to her, what Italian food means to her. And now he simply opens that file. So this is what we mean by the concept. Any interpretation, literal or not, results from mutual adjustment of the explicit and implicit content of the utterance. So explicit content of the utterance will be this very expression, Italian food, but the implicit content of the utterance will be the concept it represents for Mary, and then for Peter as well. So, the relevance theoretic position is that new senses do represent concepts and not only contextual constructions. That is, they may obviously also represent contextual constructions, but it is not unlikely that new senses that arise in the course of our interactions do represent new concepts, and that these concepts get stabilized in our mental inventory. So, given the inferential nature of communication, encoded words may be used to convey numerous concepts. As a result, there are more concepts in our minds than words in our language, okay? Because we can communicate those refined, elaborated, unusual concepts that are not encoded simply because the addressee will be able to infer the meaning. So this is the advantage of this inferential nature of our communication abilities. Okay, so this is the claim made by a relevant theorist, that in fact there are far more concepts in our minds, far more concepts we are capable of thinking than words in the language by means of which we can convey these concepts. These are not purely contextual senses that never stabilize into concepts. Some occasional properties are lost. So if it is just a circumstantial use and it appears once and never again, then it may be lost. But some are recognized and remembered and can be recalled easily. So, for instance, I've mentioned that already to you, the symptoms of a mood. So you recognize this particular mood and you know what might happen, what might follow. A particular sensation of pain. Again, you find it difficult to describe it, but you know what it is like, what it will be like in a second, and what consequences it might have. So, in other words, you are capable of recognizing, imagining, anticipating, regretting, rejoicing particular phenomena. You can retrieve them from your memory. So if you can retrieve them, if they are stored there, then they are pretty stable. So you can communicate thoughts about them. Mind you that it's very difficult for a word to stabilize in a lexicon, whereas it is relatively easy to add a new concept to your mental inventory. Because the stabilization of a new word in a language is a social and historical process, and it must be slow, and it is very rare. Because what it involves is the coordination among many individuals. So many individuals have to absorb the word and its sense and have to get used to it and start using it on a daily basis. So very few words may stabilize over a year, okay? But no such restrictions on concepts that appear in our mind. So the addition of a new concept to an individual's mind is unconstrained, in fact, because no coordination with others is needed. What we need is just internal memory management. We simply have to reorganize our memory, and we have to be able to retrieve the concept, okay, and remember the concept. Now here there is a quotation from Sperber and Wilson: do we store all new information with pre-existing files, or do we open a new file that is stabilizing a new concept? So it seems that we open a new file when we need it, simply, okay? It is not that we've learned all the words and then we check whether this concept that we're capable of thinking, it can be represented in a word, or we simply open a new file, okay? So, Italian food. You recognize a type of food that the expression hints at but does not describe, which affects your mental life. You decide what and how to cook, for instance. So if you know that Mary's coming to you, then, and that she loves Italian food, but you know that what kind of food it is not genuinely Italian, but it is just what Mary believes to be Italian food, then you can prepare something for her, which means that you refer to the concept that you must have in your mind, because you've opened a new file, and this file is Mary Italian food, or Mary's conception of Italian food. So we may say that the emergence of new concepts requires only pairwise coordination, that is, the speaker involving the speaker and the addressee. Communication does not aim at duplication of meaning. Okay, so code theories assume that this is just a duplication of meaning, that the meaning that the addressee somehow decodes is identical to the meaning intended by the speaker, coded by the speaker. Now, within the relevance theoretic approach, we accept a looser definition of understanding. So a looser kind of understanding is intended and achieved. So it is just some kind of resemblance, not identity, but resemblance. So if Mary says, "I'm tired," the utterance gets its explicit meaning through adjustment to a set of weak, not wholly determined implicatures. Okay? So if you remember the context of the museum, so that she believes that the visit to a museum was too long and too exhaustive, and that she would like to leave, and that she would like Peter to leave with her, and that she would like to go back to the hotel or whatever. So as you can see, a number of weak implicatures that are possible. So it is not just one meaning, but a number, and obviously Peter may derive just one of them, or two of them, or three of them, or all of them, but it doesn't have to be all of them, you understand? So it is just, it's enough if he is capable of deriving two of them, and then we may say that the communication is successful, even if the intended message and the received message are not identical. So mind you that the circumstantial concept of tiredness Peter constructs is unlikely to be exactly the same as Mary's, but nevertheless, the communication between them is not impaired. So, what is aimed in most of our verbal exchanges is just loose coordination. Okay, obviously there are such types of discourse, maybe where certain precision is expected, but these are not everyday encounters. So in everyday conversations, Sperber and Wilson say it is just taking a stroll together and not marching in step. So this is what is meant by loose coordination. So now I hope I've managed to convince you that in fact all words that we use are incomplete in a way. So we may talk about degrees of affability. Some concepts are shared and can be unequivocally expressed. So these are terms in mathematics. Okay, so this is full encodability and decodability. Okay, where precision is expected. So this is marching in step, for instance. Okay, some concepts are idiosyncratic, but as a result of common experience are close to the idiosyncratic concepts of others. So we may, even though we differ as human beings from one another, we still share certain experience. Some concepts are too idiosyncratic to be even loosely communicated, so these are our personal concepts, and we just feel at loss when trying to convey what we mean, but we try. Okay, so these concepts are loosely conveyed, and then they are also loosely understood. Now, a public word then does not encode the same concept for all users. So what is meant by a public word is just an encoded word, a word in the lexicon, of the language that we use. And I guess that you know it only too well, that the same word may mean different things for people. These are the problems we come across with certain abstract words such as democracy or liberalism or morality or whatever. So, but even more specific words are difficult sometimes to interpret. So, again, they have to be contextual. Their meaning has to be contextually determined because they represent simply different concepts. The speaker has a different concept than we may have. But mind you that even though we differ so dramatically in our concepts and nevertheless use the same words to express them, communication succeeds. Communication succeeds as long as the word points to the hearer in the direction intended by the speaker. So if the inferential process goes along the lines intended by the speaker, if the speaker is capable of finding such a verbal stimulus that would guide the hearer to the meaning that approximates the meaning intended by the speaker. So now, as a conclusion, I would like you to have a look at this quotation from Sperber and Wilson, but I hope to have demonstrated that, in fact, all words, even those that appear to be fully fledged concepts, should be treated as pointers to concepts, as inputs to concepts, as starting points. So they are activators of certain meanings, and these meanings are arrived at pragmatically. So, in fact, if we are again to define the relationship between mental concepts and public words, we have to conclude that there are more mental concepts than public words. So it is not one-to-one correspondence. So a few words suffice to express an indefinite number of complex mental concepts. So now let us have a look at the quotation from Sperber and Wilson. It does not much matter whether or not a word linguistically encodes a full-fledged concept, and if so, whether it encodes the same concept for both speaker and hearer. Even if it does, comprehension is not guaranteed. Even if it does not, comprehension need not be impaired. Whether they encode concepts or pro-concepts, words are used as pointers to contextually intended senses. Utterances are merely pieces of evidence of the speaker's intention.